boil in the bag, jelly in a rabbit mold, and mash that came out of a box. If you grew up in Britain in the 1970s, food was weird but unforgettable. It didn't try to be fancy, it just filled the plate. Bright colors, strange textures, and flavors that made no sense, yet somehow made your day. And whether it came from the freezer, the tin, or the back of your nan's cupboard, you probably still remember the taste. In this video, we're serving up 15 classic British foods from the 70s. If any of these bring back memories, give this video a like and tuck in. A sponge cake, some jam, a tube of vanilla ice cream. Simple, cold, brilliant. If your mum pulled one of these out after Sunday dinner, it felt like a proper event. You knew it had been sitting in the freezer all week, next to the peas and the fish fingers, but somehow it still felt like dessert with a capital D. The slices were never even. Someone always ended up with the thin one, and someone got the jackpot with the thickest swirl. And no matter how carefully you tried to eat it, the sponge would always go soggy before you finished. You didn't just eat Arctic roll, you waited for it, watched it melt, and tried to time every bite just right. It was messy, sweet, and absolutely perfect. If there was one dish that screamed sophistication in 1980s Britain, it was the quiche, and the queen of them all was quiche Lorraine, a golden pastry crust filled with eggs, cream, cheese, and smoky bacon. It was a slice of French chic that made its way onto British tables in style. By the 80s, quiche wasn't just food, it was a statement. Dinner parties featured it as the centerpiece, served with salad and a glass of wine. Supermarkets began selling ready-made versions, making what once felt continental suddenly accessible to every household. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Some joked about it being too posh or foreign, and in later years it even became a cultural punchline. But in the moment, quiche Lorraine captured the mood of a Briton experimenting with new tastes and looking beyond traditional fare. Today, it's still around, but few dishes evoke the 1980s middle-class dinner table quite like a quiche cooling on the counter. Open the packet, pour in the milk, whisk like mad. Angel Delight was the closest thing to alchemy a British kitchen had in the 70s. It wasn't mousse, it wasn't custard, it was Angel Delight. Soft, fluffy, slightly artificial, and completely irresistible. Flavors like banana or butterscotch didn't taste like actual fruit, but somehow they tasted like home. You could almost judge a household by which flavor they stocked. Served in glass bowls, always cold, and if you were lucky, with sprinkles or a flake on top. It was the pudding equivalent of a hug. Few starters say 1980s Britain quite like the prawn cocktail. Served in a glass dish with layers of lettuce, tiny pink prawns, and that creamy Marie Rose sauce, it was the opening act at countless dinner parties and pub meals. It had actually gained popularity in the 70s, but the 80s turned it into a true icon. Restaurants across the country put it on their menus, and home cooks proudly presented it as a sign of being up to date with the latest food trends. It was exotic enough to feel exciting, yet familiar enough to please everyone. Part of its charm was the theater of it. The glassware, the little wedge of lemon perched on top, and the sprinkle of paprika for a final flourish. For many Brits, this was the first taste of seafood sophistication. Today, you might see prawn cocktail as retro kitsch, but back then, it was pure glamour. Nothing started a meal in the 1980s quite like that first forkful of prawns coated in tangy pink sauce. Real mashed potato took effort. Smash took boiling water, a fork, and a willingness to believe this really was food. The granules never fully dissolved, but no one cared. The lumps were part of the experience. And then there were the ads, those laughing Martian robots mocking us for peeling real potatoes like fools. It made smash feel modern, clever, even a bit futuristic. The taste? Powdery, a bit salty, strangely comforting. It didn't matter that it didn't taste like mash. It tasted like 1975. In the 1980s, Britain still loved its puddings, and none felt more traditional than Spotted Dick with custard. Despite the name always raising a giggle, it was a true comfort food. A sweet sponge speckled with dried fruit, spots, and served piping hot with a generous pour of custard. It was the kind of dessert that brought families together at the dinner table, especially on Sundays. School canteens also kept it alive, dishing out thick slices drowned in bright yellow custard that stuck to the roof of your mouth. For many children, it was both a treat and a ritual. You couldn't imagine a proper meal without something warm and sweet to finish it off. In the 80s, when frozen desserts and packet mixes were becoming trendy, Spotted Dick stood as a reminder of Britain's love for hearty, old-fashioned puddings. Today, it's less common on menus, but for anyone who grew up in the 1980s, the memory of that soft sponge and custard combo is impossible to forget. There was nothing quite like biting into a crispy pancake without knowing if it would scald your tongue or still be frozen in the middle. And somehow, that was part of the fun. They came in flavors like minced beef, chicken curry, and ham and cheese, though the contents were often a mystery once cooked. The real star was the golden crumb coating, crunchy on the outside, lava on the inside, and completely addictive. You could smell them the moment they hit the grill pan, that unmistakable scent of processed goodness. And if the edges caught and blackened a bit, even better. For a generation of kids, it was the highlight of a weeknight tea. Quick, cheap, and just a little bit rebellious. If you went to a party in the 1980s Britain, chances are you saw a plate of vol au vents. These little puff pastry cases, light and flaky, were filled with everything from creamy mushrooms to coronation chicken, and they screamed sophistication. They were bite-sized, dainty, and just exotic enough to impress guests. Hosts loved them because they looked fancy without being too difficult to make, especially as supermarkets began selling ready-to-fill versions. You'd see them lined up on buffet tables next to bowls of crisps and sausage rolls, a marker that this was no ordinary gathering. In some homes, they became a staple of Christmas and New Year's Eve parties, their glossy, golden pastry shining under the tinsel and fairy lights. For many, the memory of pinching one off a tray while dodging adults with sherry glasses is tied directly to growing up in the 80s. Though they've since fallen out of fashion, few foods sum up the decade's love of stylish finger food quite like the humble vol au vent. It came in a cardboard box with dried noodles in one pouch and powdered sauce in another. Vesta chow mein promised the taste of the Orient, as interpreted by someone from Wolverhampton. The process felt like science class. Rehydrate this, deep fry that, stir and hope for the best. But when it all came together, it actually tasted brilliant, or at least interesting. It was exotic for its time, salty, crunchy, oddly sweet, and full of little dehydrated vegetables that came back to life just enough. No one really knew what chow mein was meant to taste like, but for a brief, glorious moment in the 70s, Vesta made us feel like we were eating something sophisticated. By the 1980s, Britain was falling in love with curry, and nothing captured that new passion better than chicken tikka masala. Tender pieces of spiced chicken simmered in a rich, creamy orange sauce. It was mild enough for cautious eaters, yet exotic enough to feel adventurous. Many pubs and restaurants proudly served it, and it quickly became the safe choice for anyone ordering Indian food for the first time. Supermarkets started selling jars of tikka masala sauce, making it easy for families to recreate the dish at home, even if the result never quite matched a proper curry house. There's still debate about whether chicken tikka masala was born in Glasgow or adapted from Indian recipes. But by the 80s, it was already on its way to becoming Britain's unofficial national dish. For many who grew up in that decade, memories of sharing a tikka masala on a Friday night with rice, naan, and maybe a pint on the side are as much a part of the 80s as the music and fashion. There's something very British about opening a tin labelled prawn cocktail and spreading it on toast. Heinz toast toppers made it normal, with flavours like ham and cheese, mushroom or yes, seafood. They were a miracle of food engineering and mild recklessness. Soft, savoury sludge that turned a slice of white bread into a full meal, allegedly. The texture was questionable, the flavour surprisingly addictive. You grilled it, watched it bubble, then tried to eat it before the toast turned to mush. It was convenient, it was strange, it was oddly comforting, and somehow it was never in short supply. In the 1980s, if you really wanted to impress your guests, you served beef Wellington. This show-stopping dish wrapped tender beef fillet in pâté and mushrooms, all encased in golden puff pastry. A masterpiece when done right. It wasn't an everyday meal. Beef Wellington was for special occasions, Christmas dinners, anniversaries, or that dinner party where you wanted to prove you'd mastered fine dining. Cookbooks of the era treated it like the height of culinary sophistication, and TV chefs demonstrated it with the seriousness of a royal recipe. For many home cooks, it was a challenge. Tricky to get the beef perfectly cooked without burning the pastry. But pulling it off meant applause at the table and a sense of triumph. In Britain of the 80s, when food was becoming as much about presentation as taste, beef Wellington stood as the ultimate centerpiece. Even now, just the name carries a whiff of glamour, tied forever to the decade when dinner parties mattered almost as much as the food itself. It was the punchline of every school dinner joke, but behind the name, Spotted Dick was a proper British classic, a dense sweat sponge flecked with dried fruit, the spots steamed to perfection and drowned in custard. It wasn't light, it wasn't delicate, but it filled you up in the best way possible. You didn't eat it, you tackled it, one forkful at a time, steam rising, custard dripping over the edge of the plate. Served in canteens, kitchens and cafes, it was always warm, always heavy, and always hit the spot. And despite the sniggers, no one ever left a crumb behind. While the 1980s brought plenty of flashy new dishes, some old favorites never left the table. And shepherd's pie was one of them. Made with minced lamb, vegetables, and topped with a thick layer of creamy mashed potato, it was the kind of comfort food families relied on week after week. In many homes, it was the ultimate budget-friendly dinner. Leftover meat could be stretched with carrots, peas, and gravy, while the mash gave it that hearty, filling finish. Every cook had their own little twist. Extra Worcestershire sauce, a sprinkling of cheese on top, or even baked beans mixed in. It was also a dish children grew up with. For kids in the 80s, nothing felt more like home than a bubbling shepherd's pie coming out of the oven on a cold evening. Even as Britain experimented with more international flavors, this humble classic stayed put, anchoring the menu with warmth and tradition. In a decade of change, shepherd's pie was a taste of continuity. Before avocado toast made headlines, there was this: pork dripping on white bread, still warm, still glistening, taken straight from the Sunday roast tray, poured into a jar, and saved for Monday morning. It was real thrift, real flavor, and real satisfaction. You spread it thick, sprinkled it with salt, maybe added a bit of the jelly that formed at the bottom if you were brave. It was rich, greasy, salty, and in that moment, it felt like the best thing you'd ever tasted. No packaging, no brand name, just pure British fuel for the day ahead. If there was ever a dish that summed up British simplicity in the 1980s, it was beans on toast. Quick, cheap, and endlessly comforting, it was the go-to meal for students, busy parents, and anyone looking for something warm and filling without fuss. The magic was in its versatility. Some liked it plain, just a tin of Heinz beans poured over buttered toast. Others dressed it up with grated cheese, a fried egg, or even a splash of Worcestershire sauce. Whatever the version, it was ready in minutes and always satisfying. For children, beans on toast often meant tea time in front of the telly, cartoons on the screen, and orange-stained fingers from mopping up the sauce. For adults, it was a lifesaver after a late shift or a night out. It wasn't glamorous, but it didn't need to be. In the Britain of the 80s, beans on toast was proof that sometimes the simplest things leave the strongest memories. It wobbled when you touched it. It jiggled when you didn't. Blancmange looked like a science experiment, but tasted like a childhood treat. Usually pink, sometimes green, always vaguely fruity. It was the dessert of birthday parties, buffets, and school halls with the heating turned up too high. Poured into rabbit or castle molds, turned out onto paper plates, and surrounded by cheers from a table full of excited kids. You weren't sure what it was made of, but that didn't matter. It was cool, sweet, and went down in 3 spoonfuls flat. In the 1980s, no pub menu felt complete without scampi and chips. Golden, breaded morsels of langoustine, or sometimes less glamorous substitutes, served alongside a heap of thick-cut chips and a wedge of lemon, became a true staple of the decade. It was the perfect middle ground, a step up from plain fish and chips, yet not too fancy to put people off. Families ordered it on seaside holidays, couples chose it for a Friday night out, and pubs proudly advertised it as part of their plated meals. For many, the memory isn't just the taste, it's the setting. Sticky pub carpets, a pint of lager, or a baby cham on the side, and that little ramekin of tartare sauce waiting to be dipped into. Scampi and chips spoke of a Britain that was discovering a taste for variety, while still holding on to its love of deep-fried comfort. And even today, just seeing it on a menu is enough to transport many straight back to a pub meal in the 1980s. No birthday, Sunday tea, or Nan's biscuit tin felt complete without a slice of Battenberg. The pink and yellow check, wrapped in a snug layer of marzipan, made it instantly recognizable and just a little bit posh. Each bite was soft, sweet, and slightly almondy, and if the slices weren't cut just right, you could end up with more yellow than pink, a minor tragedy at the tea table. You didn't eat Battenberg casually. You arranged it on a plate, made a cup of tea, and felt like royalty for 10 minutes. Whether it came from a bakery or a plastic tray at the supermarket, it was always more than just cake. It was a ritual. Few dishes in the 1980s, Britain were as thrifty and filling as corned beef hash, made from tinned corned beef, potatoes, and onions, all fried together into a crispy, golden mix. It was the kind of meal that stretched the family budget, but still felt satisfying. In many homes, tins of corned beef were a pantry essential, affordable, long-lasting, and always there when you needed a quick dinner. Some families added baked beans. Others topped it with a fried egg, letting the yolk run into the hash for extra richness. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical. Working-class families across Britain relied on it, and for children of the decade, the smell of corned beef frying in the pan was as familiar as the sound of the evening news. Today, it's rarer to see corned beef hash on the table, but in the 80s, It was part of everyday life, proof that comfort often comes from the simplest combinations. It came in a tin. You poured it into a saucepan, heated it, stirred it. Dinner done. Tinned ravioli was soft, squishy, and swimming in a sauce that was suspiciously sweet. But that never stopped you going back for seconds. It wasn't Italian, it wasn't authentic, but it was warm, comforting, and made you feel strangely grown up. Served in deep bowls on school nights, sometimes with a slice of bread to mop up the last bits. It wasn't gourmet, but for many, it was the first taste of foreign food, and somehow it stuck. For families in the 1980s, Britain, few dinners were as beloved, or as fun to say, as toad in the hole. Despite the odd name, it had nothing to do with toads. It was sausages baked in a fluffy Yorkshire pudding batter, rising high in the oven and crisping at the edges. This was proper comfort food, cheap, filling, and perfect for feeding a hungry family. Gravy was a must, poured generously over the sausages and batter, often with peas or carrots on the side. Every home cook had their own way of making it. Some packed it with onions, others added mustard for a little kick. For children, watching it puff up in the oven was half the fun, as if the dish itself was alive. And once it hit the table, there were rarely leftovers. In the Britain of the 80s, when families often gathered around the table for hearty meals, toad in the hole was a reliable favorite. Warm, filling, and unforgettable. Served on beige plastic trays with a jug of lumpy custard beside it, butterscotch tart was school dinner gold. The filling was smooth, sweet, and impossibly shiny, like someone had lacquered it. The base? A crumbly short crust that somehow held its shape no matter how much custard you poured on top. You could smell it before you saw it. It silenced noisy lunch halls in a way few things could. And if you managed to get seconds, that was your whole week made. If you went to school in the 1980s Britain, chances are you remember jam roly-poly, this old-fashioned sweat pudding rolled up with sticky jam inside, was a staple of school dinners and family kitchens alike. It wasn't fancy, but it was hearty. Served in thick slices and always drowned in hot custard, it was the kind of dessert that warmed you up on a cold day and stuck to your ribs. For many kids, it came after plates of mince, mash, and overcooked veg in the school canteen, a sweet reward for getting through the rest. Homemade versions appeared on dinner tables too, often with raspberry or strawberry jam, sometimes even treacle for extra sweetness. The texture was dense, slightly chewy, and utterly comforting. For a whole generation, the sight of that jam swirl under a glossy layer of custard is enough to spark instant nostalgia. In the 1980s, jam roly-poly wasn't just dessert. It was the taste of childhood. It sat in the cupboard, tall and sticky, with a cap that never quite closed properly. Blackcurrant cordial wasn't a drink, it was the drink. Diluted by eye, never measured, and almost always too strong or too weak. It stained your fingers, your lips, your school jumper, and probably the wallpaper too. You drank it after playing outside, with tea, with toast, with everything. Sometimes with lemonade if you were feeling fancy, sometimes neat on a dare. Sweet, sharp, and unforgettable. This wasn't juice. This was childhood in a glass. If jam roly-poly was the classic school dessert, treacle sponge pudding was its rich and sticky cousin. Steamed to perfection and served with a flood of custard, it was one of those puddings that defined British comfort food in the 1980s. The sponge itself was light yet indulgent, soaked with golden syrup that oozed down the sides as soon as you cut into it. The sweetness could be overwhelming, but that was exactly the point. It was a treat meant to brighten up even the dullest winter day. School canteens, Family kitchens and even restaurants kept it on the menu because everyone knew it would be a hit. For many children, the sight of treacle sponge being wheeled out on a trolley was enough to cause a ripple of excitement in the dining hall. It wasn't sophisticated, but it didn't need to be. In the Britain of the 80s, treacle sponge pudding was proof that the simplest recipes could deliver the biggest smiles. Half pork pie, half boiled egg. Gala pie was the king of buffet tables and picnic baskets across Britain. It looked like a cross-section of a landscape. Golden pastry, pink meat, a bright white ring and yellow yolk in the middle, neatly sliced and served with mustard or on a paper plate at a family do. It always came with that weird layer of jelly no one liked but no one scraped off, because you respected the pie. You didn't eat gala pie warm. You ate it from the fridge with a fork while standing up in a kitchen full of noise, and it never let you down. In the 1980s, Britain started to look east for culinary inspiration, and nothing summed up that shift quite like the bean sprout stir-fry. Supermarkets began stocking stir-fry packs and bottles of soy sauce, and suddenly families across the UK were experimenting with Chinese-style dinners at home. Bean sprouts were at the heart of it, crunchy, cheap, and endlessly versatile. Tossed in a hot pan with onions, peppers, maybe a splash of soy and a dash of ginger, they became the symbol of quick, modern cooking. For many Brits, this was their first taste of Asian-inspired food. It felt exotic without being intimidating, and it fitted neatly into the new trend for lighter, healthier meals. You'd find stir-fries on pub menus too, often served with rice or noodles, showing just how quickly they'd gone mainstream. Looking back, bean sprout stir-fries were simple and sometimes a little bland. But in the 80s, they represented something bigger, a Britain discovering global flavors and bringing them into everyday life. Whip, chill, done. Instant Whip was pudding for people who didn't want to wait. It came in a sachet, turned into fluffy sugar cloud with milk and a whisk, and disappeared in about 3 spoonfuls flat. Strawberry, chocolate, banana, they all kind of tasted the same, and that was fine. You weren't there for nuance, you were there for the sugar hit. Served in Tupperware, always slightly too cold, with peaks that never quite set. It was quick, it was sweet, and honestly, it was brilliant. In the 1980s, when pubs were reinventing themselves as places for hearty meals as well as pints, the ploughman's lunch made a strong comeback. A simple spread of crusty bread, sharp cheddar, pickled onions, and chutney, sometimes with ham or apple slices on the side. It was rustic food with timeless appeal. The beauty of the ploughman's was its simplicity. No cooking required, just good ingredients arranged on a wooden board or a big plate. It felt traditional and wholesome, harking back to an idealized countryside Britain, even if you were eating it in a busy city pub. In the 80s, it was marketed as a return to roots. Honest food for honest people. Paired with a pint of bitter, it became a pub classic, perfect for long summer afternoons or quick weekday lunches. For many, the taste of strong cheddar with tangy pickle is inseparable from memories of pub gardens, dartboards, and laughter echoing off low-beamed ceilings. The ploughman's lunch wasn't just a meal, it was a slice of British identity rediscovered in the 1980s.